South Africa can look forward to diversified sources of energy. The country's power utility, that's Eskom, also said to be given more resources to try and manage its debt. Government will also cut what's been seen as red tape. IPP procurements will be fast-tracked, and these are just some of the steps that government will be taking in an effort to address the energy crisis in this country that's led to the ongoing power cuts. The question, of course, is, are these measures the best solutions to deal with this problem? Let's bring in National Planning Commission Commissioner, Professor Mark Swilling, who joins us via our video link this morning. Prof, always great to see you. Thanks so much indeed for making time to speak to us. As expected, many in the commentariat already commenting on whether or not the President's address yesterday was striking the right chords or striking the right notes. What's your broad take, just generally speaking, about whether or not we're headed in the right direction here?
I definitely think we're heading in the right direction. The emphasis in the speech on energy security, ending load shedding, and supporting the Eskom management and leadership were, in my view, the most significant aspects of the overall strategic focus.
Yeah. The specifics obviously is also where it matters. I mean, part of what the President said is that there'll be scrapping of the licensing for embedded generation capacity. It's a call that's been made several times by people in the energy space. I wonder, though, who stands to benefit the most from that? I imagine it's big industry players more than just ordinary households.
Well, who stands to benefit is South Africa as a nation. There's about 83 projects in the pipeline, which together make up over 6 gigawatts or 6,000 megawatts of potential new energy that can come onto the grid. And that represents a total investment of about 76 billion rand, and it doesn't cost the state a cent. So if we accept that economic growth is what creates jobs, and you can't have economic growth without investment, this is one of the biggest single cluster of investments that is actually happening in the South African economy at the moment. So everybody stands to benefit.
How different is that particular intervention to the announcement that bid window 6 will have its maximum generation capacity double from, I think it was, 2,600 megawatts to 5,200 megawatts? I mean, are you able to help us place into context whether or not these two interventions are effectively different or are working towards the same thing ultimately?
Well, they're working towards the same goal ultimately, which is to make sure that we maximize the construction of new generation capacity which can go onto the grid. However, they are delivered in fundamentally different ways. The Renewable Energy Independent Power Producers Program, which was started over a decade ago, is an auction mechanism. In other words, the state says, okay, I'm now looking for, in this case, 5.2 gigawatts of new generation capacity. All the companies out there must now compete on price. But also what is taken into account is the contribution that is made to local communities, development contributions. And quite often the renewable energy industry, mistakenly in my view, regards that as an extra tax. But it's actually a contribution to development impact. Whereas the projects that get constructed within what was the 100 megawatt licensed space, now unlicensed space, doesn't have any of those developmental impact requirements. They're normally designed and set up by big companies or developers that are servicing big companies like mines or big factories or shopping malls, and they don't have any of the developmental impact requirements that apply within the REAP program. But overall, together, over 6 gigs through the standalone projects and 5.2 for the REAP project, that brings you well over the 10 gigs that the National Planning Commission was suggesting.
Yeah. The plans about buying energy essentially from either households eventually or from other private energy producers has also raised eyebrows, because on the one hand, we know that Eskom has debt in the billions, and we also know that a study apparently has shown that this particular energy would be marginally more expensive than, it being produced by Eskom. The obvious question that comes up is, where is this money going to come from?
Well, the energy that is generated from renewables is a lot cheaper than the energy that Eskom can generate from coal. Don't forget, when Eskom buys coal, it still has to transform that coal into energy. Whereas when it buys energy from independent power producers or from households or businesses, that energy is already being constructed. It's already electrons that go onto the grid, and all that Eskom has to do is pay for the electrons. It doesn't have to then incur all the extra costs of transforming it into electricity. So you must compare like with like. When you do that, actually renewables are now cheaper than coal-generated electricity. So that's the first point. The second point is that buying electricity and selling it at a slight profit is actually going to help Eskom, whereas it's not going to deepen the debt. Nevertheless, the president did say that the National Treasury is working on a debt solution for Eskom, because Eskom can't actually service this debt, doesn't generate enough money to service all the debt finance costs that it has now. It's nearly 400 billion. Would reselling this bought energy at a marginal profit not ultimately cost the consumer more? No, because renewable energy is very cheap. It's below 50 cents at the moment. I think it's going to rise up to maybe 60, 70%. Some people are talking about 90 cents. Even if it does do that, that's because of the Ukraine war conflict and the implications of the pandemic on shipping costs, etc. So even if it does rise to that level, it's still going to be cheaper than relying on new coal, which is the alternative. So the alternative is not existing coal-fired power stations, because some of those have to close according to our official energy policy, the integrated resource plan. We would have to build new coal, but no one's going to finance that new coal. But if they did, it would be a lot more expensive than renewables. So we have no choice. We have to put new generation capacity on the grid if we want to stop load shedding. And the best way to do that is the cheapest source of energy, which at this stage in the world, not just in South Africa, is renewables. Perhaps it might be remiss of us not to speak of this newly established National Energy Crisis Committee, the most cynical among us, rolling their eyes of the establishment of yet another committee to deal with the crisis in this country. But what do you reckon ought to be top of the agenda for this kind of body, in a context where, of course, a big part of the ambition here is to actually get rid of red tape and not to have too many people potentially slowing down the process because of the buy-in that you need to get along the way? Well, we've actually got quite a good recent record of national coordination, which is the pandemic. So I think if we can just replicate that, and remember, we now also have Operation Vulindlela in the presidency, which is like an Action A team that kind of gets things done and unblocks. So supported by Operation Vulindlela, that crisis committee, together with the one-stop shop that the president referred to, where all the decision makers are in one room, and so you can rapidly process applications. I think that all is actually good news. Yeah, I mean, I understand that as journalists, your job is to be skeptical. But as an academic, my job is to analyze how the whole system works. And the whole system could work if that committee and the other structures I've mentioned work together in a way to make sure that we get new generation capacity onto the grid as quickly as possible, and support continues to take place for getting Eskom sorted out, which is what the president repeatedly referred to. All right, Mark Swilling, thanks very much indeed for your take. Certainly a whole lot more of an optimistic reaction, so to speak, from a whole lot of people. I get a sense of that from you as well. Mark Swilling, once again, really appreciate your time. Professor Mark Swilling is a commissioner with the NPC, that's the National Planning Commission.